Hello, this is the Lord's Legion with a brand new countdown, and in this video we're going to be counting down the top 20 interesting MCU concept art. Now when it comes down to this list, there will be several key factors I will be focusing on. Those including the overall designs themselves, how drastically different they are in comparison to the final product, and just how interesting it would be if they ultimately went with these designs for the final product. And seeing as how this is going to be a long list, let's just jump right in. So kicking off the list at number 20 we have Fang Foom from Iron Man 1. Now when you look at this design for Fang Foom, he looks drastically different from the one in the comics. Because this version of Fang Foom seems a lot more grounded and looks more alien in comparison. Now admittedly I don't have too much to say about this overall concept art, however the interesting thing is that you could actually see this concept art in the background from one of the scenes in Iron Man 1. And it's almost a blink and you miss it moment, which actually makes this one of the earliest Easter eggs in the MCU. So for that reason alone, this concept art warrants a spot on this list. And hopefully we get to see Fang Foom in a future installment of the MCU. So for number 19 we have Howard the Duck from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now everyone knows that Howard the Duck made his first appearance in the MCU in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. So it wasn't a huge surprise that we would get a cameo from him in Volume 2. What's surprising is the fact that they were trying to redesign the character and make him a little more cartoony. Because in the first film, Howard the Duck did look like a legit duck, just with arms and legs and wearing a suit. While this concept art right here makes him look more like the modern look from the recent comics. And funny enough, this is only one of the many redesigns that they were planning on having for Howard the Duck. And seeing as how there's some mumbles of a potential Howard the Duck film from Marvel Studios in the works, it wouldn't surprise me if they decide to use one of these designs for future installments. So for number 18 we have Thanos from Avengers Infinity War. Now we've all seen this concept art before during one of the previews for Infinity War. And this is when Thanos is not wearing his Warlord armor, which is something that has been recently addressed from the directors themselves. The whole idea behind Thanos not wearing his armor is due to the fact that he is starting to slowly become even more powerful with the Infinity Gauntlet as well as the Infinity Stones. Because Thanos is more powerful with the Infinity Stones, he has no reason to wear his Warlord armor. And to me this is very interesting to see, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if we get to see this similar costume throughout Infinity War, especially since Thanos is the quote-unquote main character for the film. Coming in at number 17 we have Doctor Strange from Doctor Strange. Now the final costume we got for Doctor Strange is comic book accurate enough as it is, but this concept art pushes it out of the water, because this design looks more like something a superhero would wear. Plus the overall design looks almost spot on, just with a little MCU twist on top of that. And as much as I love this concept art, I'm glad that they didn't stick with this. That's mainly due to the fact that this looks a little too uniform and could easily blend with the Avengers, despite how Doctor Strange as a character stands on his own. But if he was to join the new Avengers for Phase 4 or something like that, then I think that they should rework this costume and bring it to the MCU. For number 16 we have Yondu from Guardians of the Galaxy. Now this is another one of those concept arts in which looked a lot more accurate in comparison to the final product. But that being said, if they went with this angle for Yondu, then this would drastically change the character from the final product. Because in the film, Yondu is portrayed as this asshole. While this concept art, to me at least, makes Yondu look more like a noble warrior, which as far as I understand, is exactly how Yondu was like in the original Guardians lineup. And like how I said with Doctor Strange before, I'm glad that they stuck with the final product as opposed to using this one. But even with that being said, it is still interesting to see how Yondu was almost exactly like his comic book counterpart. So for number 15 we have Scarlet Spider for Spider-Man Homecoming. Now the whole Scarlet Spider angle was originally intended to be his homemade suit, and to me this is the perfect way to introduce the Scarlet Spider costume. And this is also one of these things where it looks so accurate to the comics, it seems like it's leaped right off the pages and onto the storyboards, if that makes any sense. And seeing as how this design was ultimately scrapped from Homecoming, what's not to say that Marvel Studios is still planning on using Scarlet Spider for future Spider-Man films, because to me at least it seems like they're opening the doors for Ben Reilly's arrival. So for number 14 we have Vision from Avengers Age of Ultron. Now again, this is a similar case with Doctor Strange in that Vision already looked comic book accurate enough as he does, however this concept art blows it right out of the water, as this design for Vision is close to spot on. However, what intrigues me about this design is the fact that Vision in this looks a lot more ghostly, and it looks like his cape forms this sort of yellow aura around him, which to me makes him look very badass. However, this design makes him look more like an alien as opposed to an android. And I think this design for the Vision would make him look out of place in comparison to everyone else in the Avengers. But I think this could actually work in the Vision's favour, because the Vision always tries to look for a place in his life. And I feel like this design perfectly represents Vision. For number 13 we have Iron Man's grapple suit from Iron Man 3. Now Marvel went all out when it comes down to Iron Man's insane amount of suits for Iron Man 3, so there's no surprise that plenty of the suits did not make the final cut. However, this suit in particular, to me at least, looks the most badass, as this armor has camouflage plating throughout the entire suit. Not to mention, he also has a grapple claw on his arm, which I don't see why he needs it considering that all of his armors can fly anyway. But then again, considering how this armor has camouflage plating, it does seem like this one would be more of a tactical suit if anything else. But either way, I really love the design for this armor, and I wish they could have brought that into Iron Man 3. So for number 12 we have Valkyrie from Thor: The Dark World. Now Valkyrie will make her first MCU appearance in Thor Ragnarok. But funny enough, she was meant to make her first appearance much earlier on throughout the MCU. But what's even more interesting is the fact that they were planning on going through a different angle for the character, as this concept art in particular has Valkyrie with colourful wings. But on top of that, she also has her iconic spear and looks a lot more like the Valkyrie we know from the comics. While this concept art does show Valkyrie riding a black Pegasus. And unlike the last concept art, this one portrays Valkyrie in a more gritty and grounded angle. And with all the different designs throughout Thor Ragnarok and Thor: The Dark World, it does seem like Marvel Studios were being very experimental when it comes down to Valkyrie. Coming in at number 11 we have Falcon from Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now as you can see, Falcon looks drastically different here in comparison to both his film appearances as well as his comic book counterpart, as Falcon is wearing more armour, wearing a helmet, and even his wings are more slimmed down. And if it wasn't for the slight colouring of his wings, I wouldn't suspect that this is meant to be Falcon. But the reason why this concept art is on the list and this high is the fact that I feel like this concept art in particular is the inspiration for the Vulture's suit for Spider-Man Homecoming, seeing as how his suit is similar to that of the Vulture's, and even his helmet is quite reminiscent to what the Vulture had in Homecoming. And to me, this is the perfect example of recycling done right. If a concept doesn't work for one character, then recycle it for another character that actually benefits from it. Coming in at number 10 we have Mangog from Thor: The Dark World. Now many of you might not know who Mangog is, but essentially he is a minor villain in the Thor comics. And he can also absorb energy just so that he can strengthen himself, similarly to Red Hulk. Now obviously Mangog himself did not make it to the final cut of The Dark World, but it is pretty interesting that earlier on they were planning on using this villain as part of the film. And I especially dig the more modern take of the character's design, because let's face it, Mangog in the comics looks incredibly goofy. But either way, I would love to see Mangog make a cameo in Thor Ragnarok in this similar design. So for number 9 we have Ultron from Avengers Age of Ultron. Now Ultron had a bunch of designs when it came down to his development. Most of them were more reminiscent to his classic form, which was ultimately transferred to the Ultron Sentries. Most of them Ultron looked a lot more alien-like, especially since some of the earlier concepts of Ultron, he was meant to be linked to the Chitauri in some way, shape or form. And even some of his more humanoid appearances makes him all the more scary. And with a character like Ultron who has a bunch of different bodies, it's great to see that Marvel Studios were planning on doing different takes of the character. And a lot of them felt so different to me. Some of them were more retro, while others were downright creepy. So for number 8 we have Star-Lord from Guardians of the Galaxy. Now clear as day you can tell that this design for Star-Lord was very reminiscent to his Annihilation run. And in that depiction of Star-Lord, he was more like a noble warrior in a similar fashion to Master Chief. Now the one we ended up getting is a complete 180 to that of the concept art. You can tell with that gritty concept art of Star-Lord, you could tell that the film was going to go in a completely different direction. And I could imagine that many people would prefer this design for Star-Lord, considering how many people were a huge fan of the Annihilation run. However, we've seen a bunch of gritty sci-fi films at this point, and with the concept of Guardians of the Galaxy as a whole, you might as well just embrace the wackiness of the characters. And to me, if they decided to use this version of Star-Lord in the final product, then he would have held this film back by a landslide. That's not to say that the concept art for Star-Lord looks absolutely incredible. And continuing with Guardians of the Galaxy, number 7, we have the Nova Corp's Corp. Now we all know that the Nova Corp were very minor characters in the first film, but if you look at their designs and their uniforms, they just look very generic, and they hardly resemble Nova at all. While this concept design is a great amalgamation between the Nova Corps as well as the traditional Corp. The circles around their chest remain the same, the colour palette is on point, and I especially love the armoury behind the Corp. And although I'm not a huge fan of the helmet as a whole, I still dig this outfit quite a bit, and I wish they would have used that instead of what we ended up getting. Coming in at number 6, we have Black Panther from Captain America Civil War. Now Black Panther had a lot of designs going forward for Civil War, and this one in particular makes him look all the more slick. This design clearly lacks in the armouring department, however it does look a lot more tech based, which is very true to the character. And although I do dig this design for Black Panther, I prefer the one we ended up getting for Civil War, because I feel like all the patterns in his current suits perfectly captures his heritage in Wakanda, and all the silver plating on his current suits do show off his vibranium a lot more. While this concept art to me at least looks a little generic for Black Panther standards. But then again, the more sleeker approach does transition over to the new Black Panther suit for the upcoming film. Coming in at number 5, we have Dormammu from Doctor Strange. Now for a character who briefly appears in a film, Dormammu had quite a lot of designs during his development, most of which he looked a lot more accurate to his comic book counterpart, despite the purple around his head which resembles the Dark Dimension. While this take of Dormammu looks a lot more retro but at the same time trippy, and you can tell that this Dormammu was meant to have claws in a similar fashion to the more modern takes on the character. And then here we have the Dormammu that we ended up getting, but boy if he had the body that was more comic book accurate. This is honestly my personal favourite design for Dormammu, and considering that he is still alive at the end of Doctor Strange, I hope that he does make a comeback in a future installment. So for number 4, we have Baron Zemo from Captain America Civil War. Now it was very clear that Baron Zemo was almost nothing like the comic book counterpart, but at one point in time they were considering on adding the Baron to Zemo, and making him more of a physical threat. And you can see a lot of the elements from the comics such as his iconic mask as well as his sword. And this version of Baron Zemo resembles more of his uniform during the Thunderbolts. And to me this is the better costume to adapt for the MCU moving forward. And although he wasn't the Baron in Civil War, there is a possibility that he could come back as Baron Zemo for a future film. He is hoping that he will don this costume. Coming in at number 3, we have Steve Rogers from Captain America Civil War. Now some of you guys may be familiar with this costume, as this will be the costume that Steve Rogers will be wearing for Infinity War, which is what many people are dubbing as the Nomad costume. However, this costume was originally intended for Civil War, and this costume was only going to be used during the opening against Crossbones. And honestly, I'm happy that they're recycling this idea for Avengers Infinity War, because in the end of Captain America Civil War, Steve Rogers dropped the shield and stopped being Captain America. So to me it makes perfect sense for him to don this particular costume and become the quote-unquote Nomad. Coming in at number 2, we have the Superior Spider-Man for Spider-Man Homecoming. Now this to me is incredibly interesting because Spider-Man is only 2 films in, and already they were planning on introducing the Superior Spider-Man outfit for the film. And seeing as how Peter Parker maintained the Spider-Man costume from Civil War, I'm going to assume that this outfit was intended to be the final suit, which is of course the upgraded suit. And honestly, I love this perfect amalgamation between the MCU Spider-Man and the Superior Spider-Man costumes just merged together. Now whether they go balls to the wall and go with the Otto Octavius angle with this costume or not, I would still love to see this costume on screen at some point. Even if this costume was dubbed to be the stealth suit for Spider-Man or something like that, because this design is too good to drop. And for number 1, we have Arnim Zola from Ant-Man. Now this to me is interesting on so many levels. For starters, everyone believes that Arnim Zola is 100% dead after the events of the Winter Soldier. But this suggests otherwise considering how Ant-Man takes place right after the Winter Soldier. Not to mention we actually get to see Arnim Zola in his robot form. And believe it or not, this is only one of the many designs for Arnim Zola for Ant-Man. And to me it's very strange for a character who was originally scrapped to have a bunch of concept art at his disposal. So this to me suggests that Arnim Zola in the MCU is still alive somewhere, and someday we will ultimately see him in his robot form. So which is your favourite concept art from the MCU? Comment below and share some thoughts. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Take care and have a good one.